when we look at freedom of money, that should be a very comfortable bipartisan issue. Why do you think there is so much politicization in the tech and crypto industry these days?
I think the kickoff was completely the Democrats' fault, probably heavily originated by Senator Warren and other folks. And I think it was a mistake for the country. I think it was a mistake for the world. I think it was also obviously a mistake for the Democratic Party.
Break the cycle of exploitation. Break down the barriers to truth. Break into the next generation of privacy. Break free. Free to scroll without being monetized, free from censorship, freedom without fear. We deserve more when it comes to privacy. Experience the next generation of blockchain that is private and inclusive by design. Break free with Midnight. Visit midnight.network/break-free. CoinDesk Bitcoin Treasury Month is brought to you by Genius Group, a Bitcoin treasury company listed on the NYSE under the ticker GNS. Genius is building toward a 10,000 Bitcoin treasury and just launched Genius Academy, featuring courses from Saifedean and Ammous and more. Start learning for free today at geniusacademy.ai. Genius Group. Genius isn't measured in IQ, it's measured in Bitcoin. Looking for a faster, cheaper way to move money worldwide? Owlting, now listed on NASDAQ under the ticker symbol OWLS, is building the rails for stablecoin payments. Convert fiat to stablecoins and send money as easily as a text message. Learn more at owlting.com. Welcome to CoinDesk Spotlight. I am Sam Ewan. We are here with Reid Hoffman. Reid, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. I want to talk about everything possible under the sun, but I'm really going to limit it to the idea of internet communities, scalable intelligence in the world of AI, if you will, and scalable trust in the world of crypto. I'm stealing that from John D'Agostino over at Coinbase. But I was really excited to have this conversation with you specifically because I think there are few people on the planet who really know and understand the idea of communities, especially it relates to sort of relationships, work, all of that stuff and yourself. So welcome to Spotlight. Where do we find you today?
It's great to be here. I am in my house just outside Seattle.
Amazing. All right, Reid, I just wanted to start with the idea of, I have this thesis that I've been stewing on for a while, which is the idea that we are really sort of levering into this idea of networked communities over nation states, right? And this is not original to me. This is something that we talk a lot about in our industry. And the concept that, whether it's, the fans of Taylor Swift or folks who are into F1 or those who might be into cryptocurrency are really borderless. They are 24/7. They have their own language. And I think that this is something I feel like you were able to see at a very early age, especially around finance, but also when I think of LinkedIn around the idea of networks. So when you were starting in that world, did you think we would be where we are today in this moment in terms of this sort of, ever expanding universe of the internet?
Well, the internet and the networks and the network communities, tribes, etc., going as another lens that is kind of mostly borderless. That, yes, because that, went to even the earliest days of investing in blogging, which, probably most of our listeners are like, you were investing in blogging? What was that all about? And who knows? And so the notion of kind of network community, whether it's social networks, obviously was pretty instrumental in investing in and creating a few of those, various forms of community. Yes. Now, obviously, I think very few people saw crypto coming because it took the, Satoshi genius inspiration for the kind of the question around, okay, how do we actually have in a whole network system, how do you actually have a system that you can trust that doesn't have a centralized arbiter of that, and how does that work? And we still haven't really even upgraded the internet as much as we should have, given the genius of that, because you could say, well, hey, the DNS system should actually run on a crypto system versus its current thing, as ways of doing this. So there's a bunch of different of the genius kind of identity, value, trust, kind of system that I didn't see until I saw it because it was presented. But the whole arena of it, maybe even go back to my earliest, social days, my very first, startup company, because the notion that we all have multiple essentially identities and lenses and spaces in networks online has been something that we even went back to, another term that probably many of our listeners don't America Online and cyberspace, right? So saw the whole social part, but the economic, financial part and crypto part was something I discovered along the way, along with the rest of us.
I hear that, but it's funny. I think of those earliest days of PayPal, which I know you were involved with as both an advisor and then obviously with the group, and thinking about the idea of beaming peer-to-peer money, right, through Palm Pilots, which then becomes email, which then becomes apps and websites. That I think already was so forward-looking. And I think anyone playing in that space may have been able to say, hey, what was your cryptography and how are we keeping people safe and how are we allowing your digital identity and digital assets to be self-sovereign, which is way before people were comfortable with this.
Well, we were thinking about the issues around sovereignty, and there was this thing, another thing that was, kind of some of the intellectual forebearers to crypto and Bitcoin, e-gold and these sorts of things. But PayPal did cryptography and identity very well, but it was always through centralized services, right? Even when it started with Max Levchin's insights on how to do crypto and mobile devices, because like how to make cryptographically secure with lower compute environments was one of the things that was one of his genius insights. But even with all that, it went to a centralized record, and so we were thinking about the notion of creating stores of value that were not just the U.S. Fed bank system, but we weren't necessarily in a fully distributed sense. It was like the distribution was there was a node of the Fed records and there was a node of the PayPal records and there was a node of, as opposed to it's purely distributed. So it's on path, but not yet at the kind of the inspirational breakthrough. But by the way, actually, one thing that's worth emphasizing, part of the PayPal notion was enable every individual to be able to participate in commerce, both as accepting money and as giving money. So being cross-border, there were these, there's ridiculous fees of cross-border money transfers still are, in terms of a lot of these wire transfers that generally hit individuals and small businesses and everything else a lot harder than businesses, which can use, the SWIFT system and can use, the Visa MasterCard system and so forth. So that was one thing. But also the notion of, part of the like, if you think about kind of the economic progress as making more capability enabled in distributed networks, like you can look at capitalism that way, saying, hey, different people can invest in kind of different businesses, and you have a network of a market system all interacting with each other. And that's actually how you get a lot of economic gain in terms of intelligent decisioning, pricing, resource allocation, specialization in trade, and all the rest of that stuff. That's all the progress of the networkification of commerce and trade and financial systems and so forth. And PayPal was definitely a step in that direction because of the, hey, let's try to create as much enablement of individuals and small businesses in that, because it used to be that most of the pre-PayPal, most of the financial system was kind of very difficult for individuals and small businesses to get into, other than kind of expensive lending, like enclosure from kind of specialist merchant banks for small businesses, and zero for individuals. And that was part of the kind of economic progression to, what is now, of course, enabled by, multiple innovations within crypto.
Yeah, I mean, we literally earlier this week spoke to the head of crypto at PayPal today. And I was actually crediting them because I think they were a lot earlier than Visa and MasterCard and JP Morgan and a lot of the other financial institutions. And I think it's just in the DNA that pushing this forward was part of what seems to be how you think of an internet native business versus a legacy business. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think so. Because it's, and, internet proxy for network, because internet is basically an open standard for, creating a global, like everyone can be on the network as a way of operating. And I think being network native, internet native, so like part of, it surprised us initially at PayPal that eBay was the launch point, but in retrospect, it shouldn't have surprised us. And the reason it shouldn't surprise us, he said, well, what is eBay? eBay was kind of creating like the earliest creation of a marketplace that said, hey, if you're an individual or a small business, you can actually trade on the internet. And eBay hadn't solved the payment side. The payment stuff was horrifically bad, mostly check, right? If anyone, who is listening to this is signed to check anytime in the last couple of years, I would be like, where are you? What are you doing? So we enabled the move to the network, the electronic, of that payment, then that enabled, but that was that enablement of any individual being able to say, hey, I've got a service, I got a product, I've got a lot of the early eBay stuff was I went to garage sales and I picked out a bunch of stuff that to you is garbage and other people is treasure, and on that arbitrage is what I'm essentially selling. And so that kind of thing is what PayPal, and then also actually even eBay was doing.
Yeah. And I think people forget, and again, you guys were living this and changing it, but I think of my father arguing with me about whether putting a credit card onto the internet in 2001 was worth doing because it was all just a place for criminal and illicit activity. And then now, of course, we're all doing it on a daily basis. And I remember I highlighted in the book, The Founders, this quote where he says, sites like PayPal were often thought to be portals for illicit activity like money laundering, the sale of drugs and weapons. And, on the eve of the IPO, the country needed PayPal as much as it does an anthrax epidemic. That quote, when I read that, I was like, this is crypto in the last 3 or 4 years. Yeah. So, do you see parallels in innovation between those two financial moments in time, PayPal and kind of the rise of crypto now?
Yeah, very much. And look, the pattern is very similar, which is the existing gatekeepers and institutions go, we are powerful and happy with our position. We are in control of the know your customer. We are in control of the taxes about how things flow in it. We're in control of the information, and the world is better when we're in control. So it's something that takes control away from us is bad and evil and anti-society, anti-industry, et cetera, which has been part of, parts of the crypto system. And a lot of the different folks in the banking system who are now, of course, given Genius Act and everything else, moving towards, they will go like, oh, crypto is evil and terrible. Oh, you mean we can use it too? Okay, we will. Right.
And we can make money on it.
Exactly. And so that's what you really have to look at as a observer, as a theorist, as a person who cares about, the evolution of society, is that, of course, the existing institutions tend to be anything that challenges us in our power is bad unless we can co-opt it. And so that's why you get regulatory capture and a bunch of other things in terms of this. And part of what we were doing at PayPal is we were saying, hey, look, we had Visa trying to put us out of business. We had MasterCard trying to put us out of business. We had Citibank trying to put us out of business, everything else, because they're like, no, you're challenging our dominance and our authority in this. And so we want to put you out of business. And I think that this is very good for society. And I say, aha, you have a person selling cannabis on your system, and that is terrible. And you go, well, by the way, you have people selling cannabis too, right? Like, because the way they apply for it is not saying we are selling cannabis. They say we're just a small business and we're accepting transactions. And of course, when you get to a scale, you see what it is and you shut them down. Just PayPal did the same thing that the large banks did. And so now it isn't, and like one of the things in early days of crypto, because I started, I guess, maybe people could say they date when they start by what Bitcoin price was. And when I started, it was $100. So, a little bit way back when, 2012, 2013, something. Anyway. And people, like, I was talking to some law enforcement people, oh, isn't this terrible for, it was like, look, you would want all of the transactions that are currently happening in cash and diamonds and everything else to move into Bitcoin. You have much better chance of understanding what's going on and seeing it and tracking it and all the rest. Like this could be very easily something. Like I actually said, look, it would be a funny Hollywood film to say that actually Satoshi Nakamoto was a agent of the National Security Agency who created it to cause all the bad actors to move their finances into the system. Because, by the way, that's much better for legal tracking and enforcement than the other thing that are actually transaction. And by the way, that was very similar to the reason I had that argument at the tip of my tongue is because it was very similar to the kind of, I was in charge of going around telling all the regulators in Fed, state, other countries, or that PayPal was a good thing, not even not a bad thing, not a bad thing, but a good thing, and for the following reasons. And this is the thing that enabled. And actually, when we turned the thing around in the U.S., it was because we enabled an FBI agent to close a major Nigerian ring, because the FBI agent got in touch with us and said, well, we think this ring is using PayPal. And we said, well, do you have an account? And they said, well, we think maybe this one. I'm like, okay. And we looked at it and we said, well, that account is actually being used a lot from this public library. So stick an agent in the public library and give us a cell phone to call, and we'll tell you when the account's active. And then follow that person.
Right. It sounds like a much more simplified version of how they got Ross Ulbricht, but I
yes, exactly.
That.
No, and then we made that FBI agent's career, and all of a sudden the FBI is like, PayPal good. Right. And that's the kind of thing, the journey we're on.
My good friend Benny, he got into crypto because he started buying drugs on the Silk Road, and he was buying weed. And he kept saying to his friend who was facilitating, why does the price of weed keep going up? And he goes, no, the price of weed isn't going up. The price of Bitcoin is going up. And he goes, why am I buying weed? I should be buying Bitcoin.
Yes.
So it's that story. I'm interested in sort of what your moment of, I know at Greylock, there was some investments in crypto, I think Coinbase among others. So as an investor, did you early on see this? And I guess when I think about it, because I also went through your the archive of Masters of Scale, and there's not really a lot of crypto CEOs there. And so I was sort of wondering, is this something that you were passively interested in? You were actively, but didn't think it was really in the tech world. What was your moment where you said, you know what, I got to focus on this a little more?
Well, I was pretty active for about 2 years. So, we invested in Coinbase through, Josh McFarlane was the leading partner there, but I was helping with him. I was the second. Invested in Zappo with Wences, the guy who persuaded me Bitcoin, who
he's very good at that. Yeah.
Yes, brought my attention onto it. So I was pretty early, and I think I was probably the person who kicked off Greylock into doing this, and I was doing what I always do when I'm doing an investment in an area, you've probably seen the Bitcoin rap battle, to try to get people to understand that this was a serious, valuable thing for society. And I'd seen Hamilton, so I was like, ooh, this would be cool, let's do this. And I had a bunch of my friends who are in the crypto arena come do cameos, so if you look at the thing, you'll see Wences, you'll see Mickey Malka, you'll see Dylan Field, you'll see a whole bunch of the very early people in crypto, all kind of in the audience listening to the debate. I was there too, of course. And so I did that pretty actively. The thing that kind of entertainingly switched me off it, the reason why you probably didn't see as much in Master Scale and other things, it wasn't off, it was a switch of focus, which is I went crypto. Oh yeah, really important, because networks and the network evolution of society is obviously one of the major themes of my career, both as an investor and as a creator and as a technologist and as a founder and all of that, all of that stuff, lots and lots of that. And that's the reason why crypto was a natural thing for me. But then what happened is I tripped across what was going on in AI. And so I went back to the Greylock partnership. I said, look, I think all this, and I worked with Seth Rosenberg on Espresso and other things, and I did Blockstream, myself, and I was still doing some crypto, but I then moved really intensively into the AI stuff, because I said, oh, this is going to be really big, and people are already beginning to see crypto here. I guess I played with NFTs a little bit. I never ended up playing with DAOs. I do think these things will have interesting, kind of resurgences in the next turn of the card in crypto. But I then started doing OpenAI. I was the first. I led the first commercial round in that. Was on the board for a number of years, that kind of thing. And I was like, okay, we should keep doing crypto, but I'm going to go start looking at AI. And that's probably the reason why there's not as much of the crypto stuff on Masters of Scale. And by the way, I think by the time I kind of started going, hey, should we do Masters of Scale? I actually think it started becoming a little bit of the crypto folks is, a lot of the early crypto folks want to keep a low profile because they worry about security risk given crypto.
Well, and the administration, frankly, was targeting them. So yeah.
So I think I wasn't excluding them as much as it just didn't naturally happen.
No, that makes sense. I think, and I want to get to AI in a second, but I do think what's interesting to me, and I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, also in Silicon Valley, and I said, why do you think that we don't see more of, the Brian Armstrongs and, Paolo Arduinos from Tether, like these people seen in the same sort of canon as like a Sundar Pichai and a Sam Altman. I look at Tether and I say, here's like, in essence, the most profitable company in the world right now.
Mm.
And 450 million users and only growing. There's something really special about what they're doing, but they're not mentioned in those circles. And I think that my friend who's out in San Francisco said, he's like, it's still an oddly like dirty word here for some people. And I was just wondering if you had a take on, when we see the growth of crypto and we see how profitable a Coinbase is or a Tether is or Circle, and how much they're with the Genius Act and what's happening in the political sphere being accepted. Is there an avoidance, you think, in Silicon Valley?
I think it's diminishing. I do think that there were a number of years where there was kind of an active debate relative to good use cases versus bad use cases today, right? So, the real bad use cases are things like North Korea hacking groups, hacking hospitals, using it for, hostagewear and ransomware and that kind of thing. And I think that there was, and there is also a very strong crypto security community in the Valley, which also was like, it wasn't the Silicon Valley is by nature not very friendly to existing incumbents who say you should enshrine our power. So they weren't very sympathetic to the banks, but they were sympathetic to the hospitals, cybersecurity systems, and all kind of things. And that's part of the reason I think there was a pretty active debate. And there's still like, hey, how do we deal like the fact that crypto is, and especially usually Bitcoin is the preferred ransomware for people holding critical infrastructure, hospitals, other kinds of things hostage. Oh, that's a challenge. Like, what do we do about that? Because we don't want to, we want to maximally disable that kind of thing. But I think it's that. And then I think it's a little bit of the Valley is more used to that the companies are the icons. Now, yes, we've got Coinbase and Tether and so forth, which, should help do this. And just actually at the Masters of Scale Summit, was it last week or the week before, I had Emily Choi from Coinbase on to kind of talk about things precisely for this kind of reason. Is like bringing out what the companies are doing and how the companies are actually building institution structure that's really good. And of course, part of the thing that Coinbase did so well is to say, hey, we're going to take the early adoption hit of being within the regulatory structure because we're going to be very society positive in terms of how we do this. Part of the reason to highlight there. But I think that was the kind of the debate. I don't know if, like very few of the people that I talk to in Silicon Valley anymore think of crypto as, I think they've kind of come to realize that even though there's these ongoing challenges, it's like, in the very early days of the internet, 20 or 30% of the bits was porn, right? And, now that's not, it's grown massively and it's nowhere near that, like I don't know what the percentage is now, but it's a much smaller percentage than of the other major use cases, and including commerce, including information, including communication, and all the rest of the stuff. I think the Valley has kind of gotten that now, and I think now what the Valley is looking for is, hey, where do these become platform companies where a bunch of stuff is building upon them? Where do these use cases, like you're talking about banking the unbanked, has that happened? Like who's doing it? How's it going to happen? That kind of thing. I think the debates moved more to that, at least within my earshot. Like the only people I still have arguing crypto with me are some people from the banking industry.
Well, I think they're worried, probably, right?
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit towards AI. You mentioned that, and I know you've been both a creator, an investor, writer, and builder in the space. I think about all the, even when I think about the beginnings of you and creating LinkedIn, I can imagine LinkedIn starting today in a world of AI. And both the challenge that might feel for people as humans and the opportunity of, well, what if I had a network of agents I could hire, at my beck and call to do very specific tasks? How are you looking at the future of work in an agentic world? Is there a thesis that you are pushing forward that makes people feel more comfortable?
I don't actually seek to make people comfortable, because I think discomfort is a good, accurate, intelligent response to the changes that are coming. I do seek to make people more hopeful and agentic and in control, but that's not the same thing as comfortable. And that's part of, anyway, just the nuance. Part of the reason, wrote Super Agency, at the beginning of this year, or wrote it earlier, published at the beginning of this year. And it's mostly for everyone who's not in the AI world to kind of go, hey, why is it that I should not feel that my agency is about to get totally squashed? Why is this? When I look at the history of and the deliberate parallel was, of course, we have all this agentic technology and agents. Like, well, is that an agent and supposed to be taking my agency? It's like, no, by the way, we have agent, we have a travel agent, we have a legal agent, we have like we have a whole centuries long history of I have an agent for me, and it's an agent, right? And it's agentic, but it's an agent for me. And so how to think about that kind of super agency was a kind of a key thing. And that's part of the hopeful side of it. Now, the transitions, and I describe AI as the cognitive industrial revolution, namely anything you do with language, anything you do with language, and language very broadly construed, is going to have one or more co-pilots and how you navigate. So like, for example, within a small n number of years, call it 2 to 5, there's going to be a whole bunch of different work of kind of information, knowledge work, language work, where you don't deploy without a set of agents. There's almost no longer an individual contributor that doesn't deploy. And then you go, okay, well, what does that mean for the changing of the workforce, the work process, and all that? And the answer is a lot. And by the way, some of that will be replacement. The replacement, like that, the easiest, clearest lens is customer service, because, actually, I think within a small n number of years, people will go, take the human off, put the bot on. The bot is much better for this, because as opposed to like the call lines that exist for human agents, which we generally say, you're waiting 30 minutes to get an agent. And that's partially to try to only sort to the people who are so serious about this that they'll wait for 30 minutes because it's a cost structure. Whereas with with an AI agent, it'll answer on the first ring and say, hey, how do I help? What do you need? Because in terms of the way it works, and it'll be much better at navigating the complexity and the information around these things. But it's kind of roughly in the thesis of anything where you're trying to get a human to just follow a script, the bots will do a lot better. But all the other things, the job will get changed around. Like, how do you do marketing, and what are the marketing jobs? Well, the digital entry flow, like I just copy, cut, and paste into the forms for posting the digital advertising. Well, that's going to be AI amplified. That's, again, following a script. It doesn't do it. The jobs change a lot, and that will be challenging for people. And now the good news is, and this is again the hope and agentic, is in as much as AI is part of the challenge for this, it's also part of the solution. Like, with LinkedIn, you're like building agents to help you go, oh, your last X years has been in customer service, or your whole career has been in customer service. Here are some of the other jobs you could possibly do. Here's how you find them. Here's how you learn the new skills in order to do them. Here's how AI can help you do them. And, that kind of transition, we need to have the things working with AI in order to make that happen, because basically every job that involves language, and by the way, a lot of jobs involve language. We have meetings that involves language. Every job that involves language is going to have AI agents, and you're going to have to be skilled with them as part of what you're doing. And that means that there's a whole new set. And last little comment on this, just because I participate in these dialogues a lot. Usually everyone's talking about, it's like, oh, it's going to really affect entry-level jobs. Actually, in fact, I think very quickly entry-level jobs will change to help us. You guys are AI natives, you young people, help us refactor our AI thing. The real issue is 50-year-olds, right? Because it's like, okay, I got to learn this new thing. And so part of writing Super Agency, part of writing Impromptu, the book before then, is, hey, 50-year-olds, start using AI. And start using it, like really seriously trying to use it for serious things. Because what's going to happen is human jobs will be replaced, but by humans using AI in anything other than the scripted circumstance. And that's where I think the pattern for AI and work's going to go. And anyone who says, I know definitively it's going to be like, there's going to be a 30% layoff in customer service jobs next year, they don't know what they're talking about. right? Like literally, it doesn't like what the pattern is and the how organizations adopt. Like organizations are actually, in fact, adopting a lot slower than the capabilities are, and all the rest. Like it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but like the shape and when and how fast and everything else. There's a lot of unknowns.
I'm now completely freaked out as someone in the age bracket you're talking about. So
Yeah. Well, me too.
I'll get on it.
I'm 58. So part of the reason I can pick on
Right.
50-year-olds is that me
Right,
too.
exactly. So, going back to what I was talking about before with the idea of these kind of like borderless states based on passion and shared interest, it feels to me like agentic action. Hey, I want to make sure I am finding out the latest on my favorite artist, or when this sneaker is going to drop, or when's the best time to visit this community, should be paired with the idea of internet native money, right? You have internet native intelligence now with internet native money. For me, stablecoin seems to be the easiest way to think about this. Non-governmental controlled. We can do fractions of dollars up to millions of dollars at the speed of light, very, very, very low fees. So is that something that feels right to you in terms of one of the use cases that stablecoins will bring, in addition to obviously like balancing out the world's labor payment ecosystem?
1,000%. Look, I think the Genius Act was exactly the kind of thing we needed. It's work intensively with industry, technological experts, figure out, kind of what kinds of things are all the positive cases you want to enable the innovation on, be balanced on a regulatory perspective, and obviously strongly positive for consumers and for, the society at large in doing this. And I think stable coins are, one of the natural parts of this because it makes the whole system much more efficient. And part of that efficiency then creates productivity everywhere. I mean, that's precisely the, kind of platforms that things grow on. And, I tend to think that the notion of, look, I think it's a good thing that there's a heavy balance of stable coins and dollars. I do think the algorithmic ones are actually good to do too. So I think there's still some work to have happen there. But it's good that you got the dollar. I think it helps reinforce the dollar's position in the global world. It's part of like supporting this kind of industry, and making that happen means that the US, continues to have a very strong place in kind of global trade and all the rest. And obviously you mentioned labor and dollars, but I think that the stable coin is exactly that. Now, the other thing, I'm happy to focus entirely on money and value for our discussion, but obviously the other things in crypto that we hope for are identity systems, kind of like proof of humanity, proof of identity, also like digitization of assets. Most people don't track that a lot of your assets are digitally encoded already, a house deed, a car deed, etc. And what does that mean to all the other things? Because the digitization of assets, I think, is very important. And all of these things, well, obviously, were talked about intensely, 10, 11, 12 years ago. But we're now, technologists always tend to go, it's going to be next year. And, that's frequently not next year, but we're obviously now much closer. And I think that's also part of the whole thing, in addition to the clearly understandable stable coins as a, strong add to our networked economy. I think these other features are there too.
CoinDesk Bitcoin Treasury Month is brought to you by Genius Group, a Bitcoin treasury company listed on the NYSE under the ticker GNS. Genius is on its way to hodling 10,000 Bitcoin in their treasury while educating the world on a Bitcoin-first future. Genius has launched the Genius Academy with courses from the likes of Saifedean Ammous, author of the Bitcoin Standard, Natalie Brunell, and many more. Start your Genius learning journey for free today at geniusacademy.ai and earn Bitcoin-backed gems. Genius Group. Genius isn't measured in IQ, it's measured in Bitcoin. Looking for a faster, cheaper way to move money worldwide? Owlting, now listed on NASDAQ under the ticker symbol OWLS, is building the rails for stablecoin payments. With OwlPay, you can seamlessly convert fiat currency to stablecoins, Send money as easily as a text message and on or off ramp globally. Learn more about Owlting at owlting.com. I mean, I think yes. I think the internet native money for me is a cause to champion, because I think it rebalances the opportunity out in the world. And we were just in South America and all over Asia, and the amount of people there are very excited because they're saying, hey, we deal with volatile currencies all the time. You in the US don't have to think about that, but we do on a daily basis. And I think about the designer who's in Ghana who gets to now have her work paid for at the same rate as someone in Palo Alto, right? I think there's such an opportunity there. I guess what's interesting to me, because you mentioned let's not just talk about money.
It was just making sure we had the whole breadth.
No, but I think it's the right question to ask, right? Like, why do you think? Like, I think about the recent. Let me rephrase that. I think about the recent challenges that Sora just had with IP rights. Right. They release this app, goes super popular. Immediately people are making Ronald McDonald shoot up, buildings. And someone says, hey, you can't do that with my IP. We at least in the crypto space have been talking for now a number of years to say, hey, well, if IP was on chain and you could natively think of, some tokenization of that IP so that whenever someone generates it, you get a little bit of royalty, just like the music industry. Is there a system that you think where blockchain does help the AI world in how it tracks and how it can guarantee that IP is being compensated correctly? Or is this a world where, in the AI framing, we just have to take in as much as possible because we need to train these models, and then we'll figure out the financialization of it for creators after the fact? I guess there seems to be a lot of tension in that world. And we think blockchain can help solve that, but I don't know if that's the right answer.
It's an interesting question. So I have obviously participated a lot in the AI side of the conversation. Kind of where I start is I don't think I think that part of, kind of how these kind of laws should work is you should not impose them retroactively historically. And I think there's a very strong argument on the side of the AI folks that anything that, like, for example, they have a right to read because they've purchased or it's free to read something, that the AI training system is much more parallel to a human being reading it, which a human being's allowed to read it and a human being's allowed to learn from reading it and then do stuff. Now, I think similar to the exact parallel that if you go, okay, it's now reproducing your work and denying you economics because it's reproducing your work, that's something that shouldn't be allowed, because part of the thing we have around copyright and everything else is say, no, actually, I copyrighted, even though you bought a copy and you can read it, you can't go sell super agency to the people, and you can't kind of produce it for doing that. And so that, I think, is the rough parallel we can be. Now, we can have a discussion about how we should update legal frameworks for this. And I would still roughly argue that part of the updating legal framework should be that actually, in fact, training these systems, I think, is something we really want to enable a society and continue our leadership. Because otherwise, by the way, you're just ceding it to China. You could say that there is economics on inference and using it for, kind of how that should play. And we do definitely, just the same way as we have copyright systems, we want to make sure that there is an incentive for creators and there's economic return from that, whether the creators are individuals or companies or anything else, in order to do that. And I think that's a good thing to do. And I think there's a bunch of different ways to try to emphasize that. Now, there's a question when it comes down to, does blockchain become the necessary way of doing this? Now, I guess it would be fine if, like, part of the question is from a regulatory perspective, because, IP law tends to be, enforced by the regulatory, legal, and all the rest. Does it proxy to distributed chain infrastructure, or or does it still need some kind of centralized sources? You do need, like, just like music, like ASCAP is a centralized source, and so it enables an API. So you do need the API. Like, the better you have at APIs for, this is just essentially a computational transaction. And that's part of everything should move to computational transactions. We should try to keep as most of them in the computational API framework versus lawyers, which is an expense of getting involved in this, but we should try to do that. We'll definitely want the APIs and the computational infrastructure for it. Then you say, well, should that be centralized sources or should that be a blockchain source? Now, there's virtues in the blockchain source. It's less corruptible. It might be cheaper in transaction. Obviously, you'd have to get a very high throughput rate, which obviously a whole bunch of people in the crypto world have been working on different versions of this in order to make that work. But, that still would require getting to transactional volumes that are, I think, still largely above a lot of where the crypto networks are in order to make that happen. And it's one of the places where, kind of centralized services can tune the computational performance things in ways that are useful. So it's like, it's kind of this question of where should it be distributed assets, distributed participation, and when is it centralized assets, but there should be APIs. That would be my first blush reaction on it. Now, obviously, even before the APIs, you get to, well, where's the economics of, because like, for example, you mentioned the Ronald McDonald thing. Well, McDonald's simply doesn't want to license McDonald's to anybody. That's an enforcement issue. There's no API of you want to create a McDonald's content thing. It's like no. We want to enable that, and that's a different thing because disabling people from using things that have to do with brand likeness, other kinds of things. Now, it gets challenging because what if I say, hey, what I'm doing with Sora is a free speech parody thing? Because, like, for example, I, as a cartoonist, I can make a cartoon of Ronald McDonald holding up a bank because what I'm doing is I'm commenting on McDonald's extortion of, its customers or something else as ways of doing that. And that actually fits within our law. So it's a messy, complicated circumstance how to navigate it. And I think what we need is to make the new law or in the evolution of the law versus, over relying on these big jumps to say, we're just interpreting old laws.
Yeah, I think my perspective on it is the fact of having something that is transparent and immutable, specifically the immutable piece of it, right, allows us to say, if I were to assign a token to every piece of IP, I could then even retroactively look and say, oh, you know what? This person actually generated a musical hit based on a K-pop conglomeration of so many different artists. Is there a way to compensate them for it? Or is there a way for those people to say, hey, I want to turn off the keys? To your point, right? Yeah. McDonald's can say no, Ronald McDonald, and therefore you're not able to. I was able to, in Sora, I asked for a gummy bear and an M&M to be discussing why they were in prison together, and it wouldn't let me do it. And then I asked for a gummy bear and a candy coated chocolate character doing the same thing, and it generated an M&M with the logo on it, right? So, yes. So it's the kind of thing where clearly there's a training amount of media that went into to do this, and so I'm bullish. I want all of the stuff in the world. I want us to be able to be creative, and anyone with a creative mind should be able to express themselves, whether they can draw or not. I think that's a wonderful thing for humanity. But I also do want the original folks who, you wrote Super Agency. No one should be able to write a derivative volume and sell it on Amazon without at least you having the ability to say either no or pay me, right? Like one or the other.
Yeah, 100%. And so we have agreement. The reason I said pause it is interesting is I could definitely see it as a use for blockchain infrastructure. But generally speaking, I think a good principle is a blockchain infrastructure in some ways is there's some expenses that go into doing stuff in blockchain. Lower volume, some other things. And is this particular one of the ones that's better on the blockchain or better in centralized services? I don't know. Right.
And I don't know either. And it's a great question. So we'll come back to it in a couple of years. My last question for you on AI, I interviewed Kyle Chaker, who wrote a book called Filter World. And this book was basically about the idea that social media kind of has made sameness too acceptable. Like we don't have a lot of deviancy from the norm. You can find the same unbelievably precious coffee shop in Mexico City that you can in Tokyo, that you can in Sweden or New York, with the tile wall and the wood counters, and it all looks the same because people see it and they want that, right? And it becomes something. And I'm wondering about if you have a feeling that by ingestion and then normalization, does it actually like reduce, those wild thinkers who come up with something unique and different? If we start seeing a lot more of the same, is there a normalization happening in AI, in the quality of the written word, of the quality of, animated content or image content?
Well, almost for sure, right? There's a trend there, in part because with the tools, the amplification and creation of content is huge and is kind of a low number of nodes of creators. However, they're traded, even though, it's people using the AIs to do it. But a lot of people will use AIs of, give me a knife fight between a gummy bear and an M&M, as I'm not sure I've ever heard that prompt before, but anyone who says that kind of thing will get a similar thing. And then there'll be a lot of things that are kind of similar in that arena. And, this is a little bit of like people say with AI, are we going to just get a lot more slop? And the answer is, of course we are. But by the way, we have a lot of slop already. I mean, there's nothing other than AI that's looked at everything on the internet, right? Maybe Google and Bing search indices and AI are the only thing that's looked at everything on the internet. So there's already a ton more slop. So if you say there's 10x more slop, I don't necessarily get very alarmed by that, kind of as a rough thing. I tend to be like, okay, that's fine. Because in part, one is, will you also create a bunch more super interesting things, like diverse, interesting things? Yes, because now people who are visual thinkers, can then create something. And like, for example, my co-author in Super Agency created this music video called Brobots to kind of show that you could do, like, here's a guy who's never done anything like this before, and now the tools exist, and he created something that's actually really funny. It's kind of got a bunch of inside jokes for AI industry and all the rest. And so you have unique content because you it's now much more constrained by imagination and prompt skilling versus I know how to do the music video thing. Exactly. And so I think there'll be a lot more specific as it gets to the flood of slop and similar, there'll be different and interesting things too. And then you say, well, that'll be great. But is all those different things, are those lost in the sea of slop? Then you go, well, but then we have AI that helps you discern what you're looking for, what's unique, what is if you liked this, you'll also like these things, to be ignoring a lot of the slop. So I tend to be net very positive on it, but that the reason I did the longer exposition is because it's not because we won't have a tsunami of slop.
Yeah, I mean, I just this weekend watched the movie Weapons, and I said to myself, would AI create this? And I said, yes, if you gave it the right prompt, and did a million outputs, this could be one of the plots it created. But you'd have to go through the rest to find the one, right? So yes. I agree with that. All right, final topic of conversation I want to have is around the political sphere, and I think about this about the animosity that the Democrats applied towards crypto that we cover. And I feel like, the combination of sort of SBF and kind of like the Senator Warren anti-crypto army type post that came out really actually created an opening. And it allowed, the sort of the right and people who wanted to spend money with a more open party to really embrace our industry. We know crypto is one of the biggest lobbying organizations in the last election. I'm just worried about why this is even political in the first place. I think when we look at freedom of money, that should be a very comfortable bipartisan issue. I think when we think of, owning your digital identity, that should be a very comfortable bipartisan issue. Why do you think there is so much politicization in the tech and crypto industry these days?
Well, look, I think as your question, I think the kickoff was completely the Democrats' fault, probably heavily originated by Senator Warren and other folks. And I think it was a mistake for the country. I think it was a mistake for the world. I think it was also obviously a mistake for the Democratic Party. And of course, that has made it. And once something has become political, it takes some unwinding because people take sides and all the rest. And I do think, money, technology, innovation, elevation of business, elevation of how do we make more of the enablement of economic networks? I think the more interesting questions in crypto, yes, let's get rid of the North Korean hostage wear, et cetera, as much as we can. But like, how do we make sure that a broader, called the middle class can participate in this kind of stuff the right way is actually more the relevant issue. And I do think that it's important to, I think everyone should try to move it towards a more apolitical stance. I think that one of the challenges is funny because, the challenge for the crypto industry before was let's survive this set of kind of call it extra legal attacks, debanking, et cetera, on this. And now it's let's not try to be too identified with kind of right wing because presumptively in any kind of kind of future change, you don't want to then be politically out of favor. Like, oh, you guys were the evil people. You like, well, no. We were about the network infrastructure of the economic and innovative strength for everybody in America. That's what we are. And that's the position that you kind of want to like be like steered towards staying. Now, I think that it'll be hard to persuade, Senator Warren about that. But I think, I have had a conversation with a number of Democrats. I think a number of Democrats coming around saying, oh yeah, that sounds like a good place to be. And so steering in that direction is, I think, is something the whole industry should do. And is, frankly, what we should also be kind of focused on from a Silicon Valley perspective.
I love that you said that, because I agree. I think that, we started the conversation around internet communities. The internet communities that are natively online, who often spend too much time online, are the ones who are the most vocal about this, and the ones choosing sides, because that tribalism feels like we have to represent something. And do you see a warming up to the idea of more of a central approach where we don't have to be more bipartisan? And again, I think it's not just crypto. Like, I think about Tim Cook donates $1 million to the Trump campaign, which I think is a good business move, regardless of his politics, is a good business move. So, is there, you think, a warming up to the idea that we should just be a little bit more in the center here?
Well, I don't know fully from the online community. I think the online communities are still pretty divisive. I mean, like, for example, one of the thinkers whose work here, and, I had her on Possible recently, is Audrey Tang, which is, we want more of the algorithms to try to get us to more cohesion in the center versus splitting us apart. And I think a lot of the meme algorithms still tend to be if I show you a bunch of other people who have shared outrage with you, I get more time online. And it's like, yeah, but that sharing of outrage is actually, like, it isn't to say that sometimes outrage, but like outrage every day, outrage every week, every month, every year. And that's the whole diet causes a general fracture in society. And I think that's a not good thing. So I think, in as much as people are thinking about the 10-year future of crypto, they should be trying to move us in this direction. I think a lot of, individuals in crypto are like, burn it down. These people, like, crypto's great, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, like, this works by being part of the infrastructure of society. That's the thing we need to make. It's one of the things that I think is great about Coinbase's leadership. And so, kind of that we should be trying to steer towards that direction. But I think there's still a lot of partisan division when it gets to online discourse.
All right. I want to wind this up by just asking, we're sitting here with you. You're coming onto CoinDesk. We are crypto focused. What more, or what are you working on in the crypto space right now? How are you looking at companies you might be investing in? What would you like to see in terms of Reid Hoffman meets crypto in the future?
Well, I do think that there's a bunch of interesting stuff to do. So I've been kind of exploring some of the concepts, and, one of the things probably relatively few listeners know that I did is I actually even explored with NFTs. I used the earliest DALL-E image generators to generate a set of NFTs, and then made NFTs with that. So the intersection of AI and crypto is a natural thing for me to be thinking about, and I am thinking about that. And as I continue to do so, the questions around, I guess at the moment I'm thinking kind of more at the app layer than the infrastructure layer. I mean, Greylock's done a lot of espresso and other kinds of things, kind of an infrastructure layer, and maybe if an AI thing occurs to me there, but it's kind of coming with a very heavy AI focus. And what does AI in crypto mean has been one of the things. And, maybe when we're about to launch something, you and I should talk again so we can do it. At the moment, it's all in development, so we haven't gone ta-da yet.
All right, Reid is in stealth when it comes to his crypto plans, but there might be some alpha coming. We'll see what happens there.
Almost for sure.
Almost for sure. Reid, first of all, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm frankly just happy that you're thinking about this as other people in your sphere are as well. We see, more of an openness to our industry, and I really want to thank you for the inquiry. I think it's wonderful. We would love to talk again, and thank you for being on Spotlight.
Awesome. My pleasure.